right. Well, hey, let me give you some attaboys here. I don't know if you know what an attaboy is, but when I played high school football, my coach every now and then pulled the team aside and said, okay, let me give out some attaboys. And what they are is just kind of this, hey, good job, way to go, attaboy. And so let me say that spiritually, let me give you an attaboy and an attagirl. For those of you who have been fasting for the last 21 days, maybe some of you have even gone longer. Some people told me they started it on January 1st. Some of you may have done it just concentrated for 3 days, maybe even a total fast or such. However you did that, let me just say, way to go. I'm so proud of you all. Want to encourage you that, even some of you may be pushed farther than you thought you could go at some time, but you have leaned into God more than ever, and God will not disappoint. Amen? Amen. Understand that. Maybe you haven't even seen the answers that you are praying for, but you know God is aware. And that should alone give you some peace to know that He knows best. We just sang some of those songs. God, I look to You for what You want me to do. And fasting is one of those where you just say, okay, God, I'm putting this before You, and afterwards I'm just going to leave it into Your hands. You can take that and you can go. And so, I even want to encourage some of you, if you would like to continue on in some way, to find a way to do that. I fast every Monday for things upcoming for the week. And on the first day of the month, also do what we have been doing with our all-church fast. And so if you would like to be a part of something like that, understand just a little bit more about what some people behind the scenes are doing in fasting for our church, for our city, for our state, for our country, even revival around the world, I want to encourage you right after this service, it's there in your bulletin, that top announcement, to hit up our fasting team meeting. It's just to give you some nuts and bolts, is to give you a little bit of encouragement too of the others who are kind of going through this and on the team doing that. So it'd be about a 20-minute meeting right outside the walkway. So this way for baptism, you get wet in that meeting, and this way, actually not yet. It'll be a couple weeks, all right? And then the fasting meeting is around that way as well. I just want to encourage you because I'm so encouraged to see so many people in there from the last service who want to be a part of that. I'm also very encouraged about what's coming up here at First Baptist Church in the month of March. I've already kind of looked into, all right, what do we need to do as we are into this political cycle? You've seen the primaries that are happening. You see Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, presidential thing. It's already beginning. So what do we need to do as Americans who vote? What do we need to do as Americans who are so concerned about our country and the direction of our country? So I'll have a series in March that addresses some of that, our role as citizens in the United States of America. Biblically, what does the Bible tell us to do? God put upon our hearts to just be praying and fasting and looking ahead and saying, God, what would You have me do in our country? At the end of March is Palm Sunday. Easter is in March as well, so that'll be coming. Let me back up into next month, though. That's where February, His Little Feet are going to be here at the end of the month. If you don't know who they are, it's a great, great group. Orphans from around the world to come and just share what's going on in their lives in that ministry. Many of you have been a part of that. And then I'm going to have a little mini-series on Mythbusters. Kind of some things that maybe we believe here as rich people even, or just our theology takes us a certain way in America, but to look at what the Bible says about it. Does everything that we believe, or is kind of a part of our American Christianity, is it scripturally based? And so we'll look at that in February. Next week, I'm actually going to end our series here on Unlocked, and we're going to get to share communion as well next Sunday. So exciting days ahead. But today, let me continue on with our series on fasting and finances, really unlocking what God wants to do within in us, fasting-wise, what's God's best for us, but then also what's best for him as we treat the things that he has given us, the time that we have, the talents that we have, and of course the finances that we have as well. And so let me show you a video that gives some great teaching on this. Some of you might recognize this from about 10 years ago. I shared this if you were here that long ago, but I didn't want to show it during our fasting series because it's got some food in it, all right? It's got a pie. So I said, let's hold off on that, but take a look at this on how really we need to handle the things that God has given to us. Take a look.
Thanks.
Dankeschön.
ありがとう。
Oh, I couldn't. Well, maybe just a bite.
Oh yeah! All right!
Don't forget the interest.
Dude, he brought the pie.
Point taken, huh? Wow. Yeah. We can get to that place where it's like, hey God, let me just give you some leftovers here. Let me all the things that we have to pay, and then let me have a little bit for me, and now let me see what's left over, instead of saying, God. The one guy said, dude, he brought the pie. He's the one, it's his to begin with. And so that's really kind of the heart behind this series of just seeing, okay, God, how do you want us to deal with the things that you've given to us and the finances you've given to us? And so I hope all of you receive this book the first couple of weeks of January. If not, I have one or two extras that I have in my office. I'd love to give it to you. But we tried to get this to every household's hands, and I hope that you've read some of this. I hope you've read all of it. In fact, if not, read it this afternoon, all right? You're not going to be doing anything else this afternoon, right? Is there a football game? Are the 49ers still in it, right? Are they? I thought they lost last week, right? I mean, you played like you lost, right? Right? I'd never seen so many 49er fans come down for prayer, too. I mean, you must know something that's going on, right? All right, forget it. After the game, you can read it. But let me just remind you what the author here, Randy Alcorn, says. It's kind of a summary of it. The treasure principle is that you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. That idea that what God has given to us, He owns. In fact, He owns everything. We're just His money managers. In fact, would you read these points with me? This is on page 100 of the book if you want to jump ahead and get kind of the cheat sheet note of it. But he just lays this out. In fact, would you read this with me? God owns everything. I'm His money manager. It goes on to say this: my heart always goes where I put God's money. Further on, heaven and the further future new church, not His fallen one, is my home. Next, I should live not for the dot, but for the line. And if you haven't read that part of the book, it talks about how really our time spent here is just a dot. The line is everything that goes on from this time forward. Goes on, two more, read them with me. Giving is the only antidote to materialism. And then God prospers me not to raise my standard of living, but to raise my standard of giving. I really want to encourage you in that, to look at that. In fact, the next page has kind of a covenant that you can sign, date, that's between you and the Lord, that you could do in the book. And then on the following page, page 102, it's an interesting exercise that he takes you through, because there's 31 days or 31 kind of truths. He calls them liberating truths, radical truths about giving. And the very first one just kind of hit me between the eyes. In fact, I confessed that to my staff on this last week. I said, man, I read this and it made me really think. I'd encourage you, there's 31 of them, maybe one per day. Here's the first one. Would you read this with me? It says, Lord, in your word, you make a direct connection between experiencing grace and expressing grace through giving. So does the degree of my giving suggest I recognized and embraced your grace? It's a good question. Good question. It's not, oh yeah, okay, we're supposed to give. It's that, God, out of the grace that you have given to me, I want my life to be reflective of grace giving all and everything I do. And that's not only finances, that's your time, that's your talent, that's your treasure as well that we would give. Because it is no accident that God has blessed us materialistically in the United States of America. He just has. But with that blessing comes responsibility. That's what we really need to kind of grab onto. And so we looked at these verses last week in 1 Timothy chapter 6. If you have your Bibles or on your phones, flip it open to that. 1 Timothy chapter 6. Let me just kind of take it a little bit slower this week and look at what Timothy says to the rich people of the first century that specifically addresses us here in the United States of America, because we are the rich in this world. And so let me read 17 again, where it says this. It says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in who? In God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Look at that phrase, not to be arrogant. There's a scary word in 2024. A scary word that kind of ties into this subject, and that is the word entitlement. We can become very arrogant when we think we're entitled to something. It's like I saw a stat from the 1970s to today, of the things that we think are necessities rather than luxuries in our lives. Back in the 1970s, about 20% of people thought a second car was a necessity. Whereas today, well over 90% of the people feel like a second car is in a household is a necessity. Everything was significantly higher. A second television from then till now. Back in that day, it was more than one telephone. Now it's not just a couple telephones in a household. It's everyone needs to have a telephone, their own phone in a household. A dishwasher used to be a luxury. Now it is assumed that it is a necessity. Car air conditioning. I don't know if you thought about this, but how blessed you are if you can get into your car and turn on the air conditioning when you go. Now, I know from about October through about March, you don't think much about this, but a few years ago, our family had a little escapade with this because the car air conditioning went out. And we have a couple different cars, and so I said, we don't need car air conditioning. Can we just try not to have car air conditioning? Let's just see what it does if we don't, all right? And it happened to be my wife's car that was taking place in. And so she's like, okay. All right, let's try this out. I mean, she was coming home tired. She had sweat dripping down her face, like, wet hair coming down. She'd walk in. I mean, basically kind of frazzled and on edge. And I'm thinking, what's the big deal, right? I grew up in the Central Valley, and I was out in 100-degree weather when we played sports and did things like that. I mean, literally, I said, no big deal. She says, okay, big boy, why don't you try it? All right, challenge taken, I said. So we swapped cars for a week. Oh my goodness, it lasted 1 week. I would come home as a rage monster. I come in the door, she'd be like, oh, how was your day? I'd say, it was fine. My goodness, she's like, okay, well, dinner's ready. Are you hungry? No, but I am thirsty. She's like, oh, looks like you had kind of a tough day, huh? I said, well, yeah, when you drive through hell and back, yes. You guys think it's funny, but you try it, right? I'm serious. And don't try it in January. Don't be, oh, yeah, I can do it in January. No, you try it in June, July, and August and see what it feels like. It is not a good feeling. I mean, immediately, luxury to necessity is where that took that, right? I mean, and yet that happens with so many things in our lives, and we forget. I've been in a couple of churches, church meetings and such, and I see that they have kind of some different air conditioning units on the wall, and I asked a couple of churches about it. They said, yeah, we didn't even have air conditioning in this church until about 5 years ago. Like, how did you survive? First Baptist would revolt if we didn't have air conditioning in this room. Why? Because we see it now as a necessity, and we can get a little entitled when we just see it that way. And you know what entitlement can do? Entitlement, when we think about it long enough of the things that we really want, that's when we convince ourselves that that's what I have to have. I mean, it's actually the beginning of some lawsuits that I've seen in the news a number of years ago. I don't know if you remember this, but I shared this a number of years ago, that the San Francisco Giants were actually sued for passing out Father's Day gifts only to men. Somebody walks through there and says, well, no, that should be for me too. And now all it ensues. Now, that's not very far-fetched today because of all that we've experienced going in the last 4 or 5 years. Men become women, men can have babies and all that kind of stuff, which is ludicrous. And so, I mean, it's just fathomable. But you think about when that started, 10, 15 years ago, someone said, well, that shouldn't just be for the fathers. I should be able to gift as well. A psychology professor saw this as well, for sexual harassment because of the presence of mistletoe at a Christmas party. Yeah, people feel like, oh, that's wrong, and so I'm just going to sue your organization because of that. In fact, here's another odd one. A psychic was awarded $986,000. A psychic awarded. Didn't just sue, was awarded $986,000 when a doctor's CAT scan impaired her psychic abilities. True story. My question, though, is, shouldn't that psychic have known not to go to that doctor, right? Not to done that CAT scan? beside the point, right? Right? But really, entitlement. People feel entitled to things when we're not. And that entitlement really makes us become a little arrogant when we don't get our own way. In this American culture, with as blessed as we are with our stuff, we've been duped into believing that we're the sum of what we own. Our basketball shoes, that kind of becomes our status that we wear. Clothes that we have on, our phone that we carry, our house that we live in, our car that we drive. Have I seen this right? But now, is it those Stanley cups, right? It's no longer good to have but now you got to have one of those Stanleys that's like a bucket full of water, right? That you can, I mean, they're just all the craze, and people have them really for kind of somewhat of a status symbol. Because you can get that water cold other ways, you can carry that out, but it's like, wow, I got my Stanley here, and now look at me. I mean, we need to be reminded that that's not who we are. That's just what we have. And God is the one who has blessed us, who has given us those types of things. So it goes on. And Paul says this. He says in 17b, he said, those who are not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth. He gives a little tagline, that is so uncertain. In the Greek, this means don't put your confidence. Don't put your trust. Don't lean into your wealth. Because what the wealthy can do, scripturally it's described, is they can just set things up around them. They can almost build a fortress to feel like they are self-sufficient. Look what it says in Proverbs 18:11. Proverbs 18:11 says this. Would you read it with me? Go. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. See what that is? Your wealth can cause you to be a little arrogant, to put your hope in that rather than in God. We can think, well, you know what? If I'm rich, money can solve it all. I can't be harmed when I kind of build this wall around me. I'm above it all. It develops in a sense of pride and arrogance being at that place. In fact, we talked about this last week, that the things we have, the salary that we have, there's always a sense of saying, well, you know what, that's not me, I'm not rich, I'm not doing that. It's somebody who's a little bit more, who has a little bit more. And that's where Solomon comes in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and he gives us his word. He says this, 5:10, he says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. Never said. The rich, those who like to get rich, are constantly looking for their identity and for their security in riches, which Paul would say is a bad way to be rich. There's a good way to be rich. That's a bad way to be rich, he would say. And certainly Solomon backs it up in the Old Testament. But Paul comes in and says, you know what? Those of you who are rich, he's talking to us here in America, I want you to be a good rich person. And so what he says in verse 17, he says, put your hope in God. And he's talking about Christians here. So it's people who've already given their lives to Christ. Put your hope in God, not in the blessings, the financial blessings that God has given to you. He's reminding them not to put their hope in their money, but to put their hope in God. Because understand, the number one competitor for your heart is your money. That's what Jesus said. The number one competitor for your heart, the place that God wants, is our stuff. In fact, look at what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. He says this. He says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be loyal to the one and despise the other. Now, look at who he sets up here. Watch this. He says, you cannot serve God and, what's the word there? Read it with me. And mammon. Now, if you have an NIV, ESV version, that might say money. But I wanted to take this back even farther to find the original word that Jesus is talking about here. Because he uses this word mammon. This is the New King James Version. There's a few others that have this as well. That I think gives us a little revelation of what he's getting after. Mammon is an Aramaic word that essentially means riches. And the Assyrians borrowed it, kind of this god of wealth, from the Babylonians. If you remember, in Genesis chapter 11, there was a Tower of Babel. And they thought that they could build a building high enough to get to God. And so there was a sense of hubris, there was a sense of arrogance that they had in doing this, a sense of pride in trying to do this. And so this mammon is kind of a God-type attitude that says, I don't need God. We as human beings don't need God. We are self-sufficient. And that's true with the spirit of mammon, because the spirit of mammon tells us you don't need God, trust in your riches. So in a sense, the biblical word mammon is the spirit that rests on money when it's not dedicated to the Lord. Money that is dedicated to God, that's submitted to him and to his ways, has the spirit of God on it. But the spirit of mammon is on money that is not submitted to God and has a spirit of mammon on it by default. And that spirit of mammon comes from the spirit of the world. That means riches or your things that kind of create this sense of separation from God, saying, I got this. I have this under control. In fact, mammon promises us only things that God can. Mammon promises us security. It promises us significance. It promises us identity. It promises us independence. It promises us power and freedom. And what it does, as the writer there in Proverbs says, is it insulates us from thinking we have needs. And it creates this spirit over us that says, I can take care of this on my own. And so Jesus steps into here and he says, no. In fact, in the book of Revelation, if you were with us last August, we went through the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 13, when the Antichrist comes, he's going to set up an economic system here on earth. And within that economic system, you have to submit to the Antichrist or, take the sign of the beast, mark of the beast. We talked about all that type of thing. That's an economic system. That, in a sense, is the spirit of mammon on earth, that will even be at the end of earth, that we have to be careful is not already overtaken us right now. That's no coincidence that things are going to end that way. And so Jesus steps into here again in Matthew 6:24, and he says, you cannot serve both God and mammon. He sets it up that way. These are the two things that are going to be contradiction. They're going to be fighting for one another. You cannot serve both. The spirit of mammon stands in direct opposition to the Spirit of God. And what God wants us to know is that really, when you lean too hard on that, rather than leaning into God, you're building your fortified walls. You're stacking things around you that insulate you from the hurts in the world. And then one day, you find out that your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend has been cheating on you. And there's no amount of money that's going to cancel the hurt and the pain that brings. One of these days, the doctor may say you have cancer. One of these days, your daughter or your son might say, you know what, I don't want to be around you anymore. I don't want to be in your life any longer. One of these days, you may get fired from your job. And if you're leaning too hard into those areas, those walls are going to fall down. And that's where Jesus says, don't serve that God of this age. Don't serve the God of mammon, of riches that you're looking for. Rather, put your hope in God, as Paul says here in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Jesus wants us to use our riches for the right purposes. And let me remind you, there's no harm in enjoying the good things that God has given to us. But let's recall, we are always blessed to be a blessing. In fact, anyone in Scripture who has ever been blessed, you can see, you can read, anytime they're blessed, they're set up to be a blessing to others in their lives. That's what God's blessings are to do, to allow us to be a blessing to others. So don't forget how blessed we are, number one, but let's also not forget how we need to bless others. And in fact, it's a command. You say it is? That's a command? Yeah, look at what Paul says. Next verse, verse 18. He says, there it is right there. Command them to do good, to be rich in what? Good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. This phrase, rich in good deeds, is referring to this ancient Hebrew concept called the mitzvah. And the mitzvah is a Hebrew word that means commands. And so the ancient rabbis taught that when we do the commands of God, when we do good, rich in good deeds, as we would say, as Paul says here, then we are helping to repair and restore the world. And so actually the early Christians kind of picked up on this, and so you'll see verses like Ephesians 2:10, which talks about how we are called, we are saved to do mitzvah. We are saved to do good works and do good deeds. We are blessed to be a blessing. And before you think I'm just talking about your finances, I'm not. We are also blessed and saved and called to serve and to give God with our talents. We are also called because many of us are very rich in our time as well. Now, some of you might say, man, I don't have any time, Pastor. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm going to school. There are certain times in your life where that may be true. But think about different stages of life. I know when my wife and I were married, I finished up seminary, and she was just starting to work, and we'd have time off and such. We had a lot of time that we could use. That was a season of life where we were intentional about saying, let's pour it into ministry. Let's pour it into doing God's work. Now, the child rearing ages were a little tougher. Those are harder, and so there might be different stages where you're not. But now we're in our empty nest stage. And so you say, okay, we have a little bit more time. We can do more things. We can bless others in different ways. Some of you who are retired are in that stage as well. And so think about this for just a moment. And if you're not in one of those stages, think about getting there at one time. Financially, if you work, if you're a part of a company or you have a boss, you will probably do what's called dollar cost averaging. It sets you up for your retirement. What dollar cost averaging does is they take a little bit out of your paycheck, no matter if the market is high or low, whatever it is, you set it aside out of your paycheck to retire on. That's called dollar cost averaging. What I'm wanting to propose to us is that we should be doing that spiritually as well. We should be doing dollar cost living, not just dollar cost averaging, but dollar cost living with our time. Of saying, okay, God, you have given me 3 weeks of vacation, or you've given me 2 weeks of vacation, you give me 4 weeks of vacation, whatever that may be. Let me on the front end set that aside as saying, God, I want to serve you over this week. And so maybe it's 1 week that you give to the Lord. Maybe it's a mission trip that you get to take. We have a team going to Honduras in just a few weeks here. Maybe it's saying, you know what, I want to work at an agency around the city. I want to be a blessing in some way, somehow. Maybe it's to come down here to the church and say, okay, this is my week that I'm off. How can I work and how can I serve? That's called dollar cost living, deciding on the front end, just like you do dollar cost averaging with your retirement, and saying, let me serve God, you, so I can send those blessings on ahead, so that I can do good deeds in this world, but those deeds can bless others so that they can share the next world as well. I want to challenge you with that, to think in that type of way. In fact, that's how First Baptist even does what we do, because people on the front end are saying, yeah, I'll come and I'll be a part of a praise team. Yes, I'll come and I'll help usher and greet. Yeah, I'll come and I'll get involved with the Awana program. Yeah, I'll come and I'll be a part of this or that, have a ministry here at the church. Those are all things that people say, I've been given time in my life, and I want a portion of that time, God, to go to you. tithe your time, if that's the way you'd like to even think about it. Now think about this, because most of the time we end up being a little selfish with our time. And most of the time, we may actually be giving God the leftovers of our time. Well, let me see what I have left. See, that is the exact purpose. Let me talk a little bit more financially. That's the exact purpose that God wants us to give to him first and foremost. The tithe in the Old Testament was given off the top. It was the best. It was given to him first. It was kind of called a first fruits that was given to God off the top. It was not the leftovers. I don't want us to be a leftover church. I don't want us to be leftover people. I don't want us to give anything to anyone else. Maybe it's our time, maybe it's our talent. That is just kind of like, well, I'll give you what I have. Let's look at even those areas and say, God, what can I give you first and foremost, not leftovers? That's dollar cost living, saying, God, you have my best. And even in my finances, I want to say, God, you have my best. It's off the top, whatever percentage you decide to give. And while 10% was the requirement in the Old Testament, a very curious thing happened in the New Testament. Here comes Jesus, and he says, I don't want it just to be this mandate that I give to you, that you follow from the Old Testament. I want to give it to you as going for your heart. I want you to understand that this is not just a matter of the pocketbook. This is really a matter of the heart. Look at what he says in Matthew chapter 23. Jesus is talking with some Pharisees. And he's doing this. Here's what he says. He says, woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees. What's the word there? You hypocrite. Man, when he starts throwing out the H word, look out. It's getting real, right? He's like, you hypocrites. He says, you give a tenth of your spices. Mint, dill, cumin. Okay, you're following through with what the Old Testament says. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law. Justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So yes, you are to give. Yes, that's already in place. But now I want you to give over and above. I want you to make it a matter of the heart. I want your heart to be drawn to me because Jesus knew. He knew that the biggest competition for us, our time, our treasure, our talent, was our stuff and our finances. If we get that right with God, we're going to be so much more open to what he wants me to do. What Jesus does here is he ups the ante. He says, not just about a legalistic 10%. Yep, you should, but it's not just about that. I want your heart behind it. And now watch this. We talked about this a little bit back in December. Grace, New Testament, grace always gives more than the law. Old Testament. Jesus comes along, he says, let's up this. Remember what he said? He said in Matthew chapter 5, don't murder, but even if you've thought about murdering, you've already done it, matter of the heart. He says, okay, Old Testament says don't lust, but I tell you, man, if you've even thought about something, well, Old Testament was talking about adultery, don't commit adultery, the actual act. He said, if you've even thought about it, if you've even lusted, that's the same thing in God's eyes. You've already walked out that step. It says, you know what? Someone asks you to go 1 mile. Nope, go 2. If someone tries to require your tunic away from you, nope, give them your cloak as well. Grace always gives more than the law. Hear me on that. Grace always gives more than the law. We don't want to just live for the law. We want to go for grace because it gives more. Don't use grace, First Baptist, as a reason to give leftovers to God. Well, you know what? I really don't have to do this. That's saying, well, cheap grace. I'll just accept that so that I can give God whatever I want. Don't use that grace, cheap grace, to give God leftovers. I mean, that's what the video was kind of hitting on, right? Let's not give him the last. Let's give him the first. Dude, he brought the pie, right? He's the one who brought the pie. Let's give it to him first, the first and foremost, which goes to him. And First Baptist, we are able to do as much as we do because so many of you are following this principle, and so many of you are doing the dollar cost living where you're saying, okay, here's what my planned out, regular, sacrificial gift that I give to the Lord right there at the beginning of the month. Here we go, God. This is yours, not at the end with what's left over. This is yours from the very beginning. The best, the first fruits. Now, I know many of you are at this point in the series saying, okay, Pastor Barry, we got it. All right, we've heard it. We've heard it. We don't need to hear it anymore. Okay, we got it. Well, do we? Now, I'm not using this just as an example from here because I have no idea what the percent of you give and all that type of thing. But I'll just use this as a for instance. Across the country, statistics have come out and they have said that the average Christian gives about 2.7%. Not just to their church, but just gives in general. That's why I look at this and I say, okay, God, you've got some things that are in competition with our hearts. And that's why, yes, I've hit on this for a number of weeks, but I want to keep going and keep pressing on this because I want you to understand grace always gives more than the law. Grace does not give leftovers. Grace decides ahead of time to say, God, you have been so generous to me. That's why I want to be so generous to you as well. I mean, can you imagine what this would do for the city of Stockton, what it would do for the nation of every believer if it didn't come out to 2.7%, but it came out to somewhere about, okay, 10% is what we start with, and then we just go from there? Do you understand how the economics of that would change the world for the gospel of Jesus Christ? And it wouldn't be about the finances of it. It would be about the heart. Because more of our heart would be open to God. More of our heart would say, whoa, I want to give you more time. Whoa, I want to use my talents for you. And yes, when there's a need, I want to give over and above what you've asked me to do. I pray that you and I will leverage our time, that we'll leverage our talents, that we'll leverage our treasure, and we'll do it to be able to give more and to do more for the kingdom. And then, when you do that, here would be the great reward. When you do that, perhaps one day someone will ask, why are you so generous? And you will say, because God sent his leftovers, right? No. You'll say, because God sent his best. God sent his son to die for me. And because I understand that God sent his best, that God did not hold his best out on me, it's my motivation to say, God, I give it back to you. Not off the bottom, not at the end, but right off the top, because it says you have first place in my heart. You know, it's then, and this is why I bring up these little things. I want to go over them. In fact, put up the next slide there. Remember, we saw this saying at the very beginning of the message. Let me read it again. Lord, in your words, remember, it's in the back of the book, some things to reflect upon. You make a direct connection between experiencing grace and expressing grace through giving. So does the degree of my giving suggest that I have recognized and embraced your grace given to me? I hope you're living as a demonstration of God's grace given to you. Amen? Amen. Let's pray.